At Christmas dinner, I overheard my parents planning to move my sister's family into my $10 million condo for free. They thought I was just the quiet single sister with a boring computer job who would do whatever they asked. I stood silently behind the kitchen door, while my brother-in-law Kyle laughed and said, "Once we get the keys, we will change the locks. It is called squatter rights, and there is nothing she can do about it." I listened to my own mother agree to kick me out of my own home just to please my golden child sister. I did not scream. I did not flip the table. I simply smiled, walked back to my seat, and sent a text message that would ruin their lives within 48 hours. 90 missed calls later, they would learn that I am not just a pushover sister. I am the landlord, and their lease has just been terminated. Before I continue this story of how I evicted my entire toxic family without saying a word, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit subscribe and like this video to find out how a simple text message destroyed their entire master plan. My name is Nia, and at 32 years old, I have mastered the art of becoming invisible. To the outside world, I am a ghost. To my family, I am a failure who stares at computer screens all day in a home office. They have no idea those screens generate $5 million a year through quantitative trading. They see my silence as weakness, but in my line of work, silence is where you make the most money. Last night was supposed to be a celebration. The air in my parents' house smelled of roasted turkey and expensive perfume. My mother Joyce sat at the head of the table, beaming at my younger sister Jasmine. Jasmine is 29 and has never kept a job for more than 6 months, yet she is the pride of the family. Sitting next to her was Kyle, her husband. Kyle is a white real estate agent who has not sold a house in 2 years but walks around like he owns Manhattan. I had excused myself to the kitchen to get more ice for my Pinot Noir. The heavy oak door was slightly cracked open, and that is when I heard my name. The voices were hushed but clear. Kyle was whispering with a tone of arrogance that made my skin crawl. "Do not worry about Naya, Mom. I checked the state laws. If we move in and stay for 30 days, we establish residency. It is a legal loophole. She cannot kick us out without a court order that takes months to process. By the time she figures it out, we will have legal possession." My blood ran cold. I expected my mother to defend me. I expected her to say that stealing her eldest daughter's home was wrong. Instead, my mother chuckled softly. "Good, she does not need all that space anyway. We will tell her she needs to move back home to the basement to help take care of Dad. It is time she made a sacrifice for this family." Jasmine laughed and added, "Finally, I deserve that skyline view more than she does. She does not even host parties." I stood there gripping the cold marble counter. My own family was plotting a hostile takeover of my life while eating the food I paid for. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my dress, and made a decision. I walked back to the dining table, sat down, and unlocked my phone under the napkin. I opened my encrypted messaging app and texted my lawyer 2 words: "Sell it." They wanted my house so badly, well, they were about to find out exactly what happens when you try to steal from a shark. I returned to the dining room and slid back into my seat just as Jasmine was launching into her rehearsed speech. She poked at her glazed ham with a fork and let out a dramatic sigh that was loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "It is just so hard right now," she said, looking directly at our mother while ignoring me completely. "Little Leo is starting to crawl and our 2-bedroom rental feels like a shoebox. Yesterday, he bumped his head on the coffee table because there is simply no room for him to explore. I feel like such a bad mother keeping him trapped in there." My mother Joyce immediately reached over to pat Jasmine's hand, cooing sympathetically. "Oh, honey, you are a wonderful mother. It is not your fault the economy is tough. You just need a lucky break." That was my cue to offer help, but I remained silent and took a slow sip of my wine. The silence made Kyle uncomfortable. He cleared his throat and decided to switch tactics from pity to professional advice. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his cheap red wine like he was a sommelier at a Michelin star restaurant. "Listen, Nia, let us be real for a second. I have been looking at the market trends, and frankly, you are sitting on a dead asset. He pointed his fork at me as if he were lecturing a child. That penthouse of yours is $10 million of stagnant capital. You are single, you work from home. You do not need 5,000 square feet. It is frankly irresponsible financial management. I almost choked on my drink. Here was a man who had to borrow money from my father last month to fix his transmission, trying to lecture me on asset management. I control algorithms that trade millions of dollars in microseconds, but to Kyle, I was just a girl who got lucky with a crypto boom or a lottery ticket. He continued his lecture with growing confidence. Real estate is about utilization, Nia. I just closed a deal on a split level in the suburbs for $200,000. It was a complex negotiation, but I got it done because I understand value. If you let me and Jasmine take over the penthouse management, we could maintain the property value for you. I decided to play the part of the clueless sister to see how far he would go. I widened my eyes and put on my best confused face. Wow, Kyle, that sounds really complicated. So you think living there would help the investment? Kyle smirked and exchanged a quick, victorious glance with Jasmine. Exactly, Nia. A lived-in home is a happy home. Plus, with my real estate license, I can write off the maintenance as a business expense. It is a win-win. You go live with mom and dad to save money, and we protect your asset. I nodded slowly, hiding the shark-like grin that wanted to break through. They actually believed I was this stupid. They thought they had manipulated me into submission. Little did they know that while Kyle was bragging about his $200,000 sale, I had just received a confirmation text from my broker. The papers for the penthouse sale were ready. I was not just going to evict them, I was going to let them walk right into a trap of their own making. Dinner concluded, and the plates were cleared, but the interrogation was just beginning. My mother Joyce caught my eye and tilted her head toward the sunroom. It was not an invitation, it was a summons. I followed her into the glass-enclosed room, where she kept her prize-winning orchids. She closed the French doors behind us, cutting off the noise of Kyle's boasting in the living room. The air in here was humid and thick, perfectly matching the suffocating conversation I knew was coming. She did not waste time with pleasantries. Nia, listen to me. Your father is not doing well. His heart is weak and he stays awake at night worrying about Jasmine. You know how sensitive he is. If he keeps stressing over your sister living in that shoebox apartment, he might have another episode. Do you want that on your conscience? She reached out and adjusted the collar of my blouse, a gesture that felt more like a leash tightening than affection. You are the oldest, Nia. You have always been the strong, solitary one. You are single, you have no husband, no children, and you spend all your time staring at screens. You do not need a $10 million penthouse to do that. You are selfishly hoarding space that could save your sister's marriage. The word selfish echoed in my head, triggering a memory so sharp it almost made me laugh out loud. 2 years ago, my father needed a triple bypass surgery that their insurance refused to fully cover. The best surgeon in Chicago required an upfront payment. I stood in the hospital billing office and wired $200,000 from my private account without hesitating for a second. I saved his life. I never told them the cost. I just handled it because that is what I do. When he came home from the hospital, Jasmine stopped by with a $50 shirt she bought from a clearance rack. My mother wept over that shirt. She paraded it around, telling every aunt and cousin how thoughtful and generous Jasmine was. They framed me as the cold, distant daughter who just stood in the corner while Jasmine was the angel who brought gifts. I paid for the beating heart inside his chest, and they thanked Jasmine for the shirt covering it. Back in the sunroom, my mother's voice pulled me out of the past. So here is the plan. You will move back home with us. The basement is finished, and it is perfectly adequate for a single woman. You give the penthouse keys to Kyle and Jasmine for a few years until they get on their feet. It is the only way to keep this family together. She smiled that tight matriarchal smile that demanded submission. She thought she was offering me a compromise. In reality, she was offering me the final reason I needed to burn this bridge to the ground. I looked at her and realized she did not see a daughter. She saw an insurance policy she could cash in whenever her golden child needed a payout. I drove home in silence with the city lights of Chicago blurring past my window. My penthouse was supposed to be my fortress, the one place where I did not have to play the role of the dutiful, obedient daughter. But as I stepped out of the private elevator into my foyer, I felt a strange chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It was the sinking realization that my sanctuary had been violated long before the dinner conversation took place. Kyle's specific comments about the layout and his confidence about the nursery space gnawed at me. He knew too much about the lighting in my office. I walked straight to my command center, which is what I call my desk setup with 6 monitors. I pulled up the cloud server for my home security system. I did not have to search for long. I scrolled back to last Tuesday when I was in London for a fintech conference. The timestamp read 10 in the morning. On the high-definition screen, I watched my front door swing open. I held my breath expecting a burglar, but it was far worse. It was my mother, Joyce. She was using the emergency key I had given her strictly for life-or-death situations. She held the door open and ushered in Kyle, Jasmine, and a woman I did not recognize who was carrying a tablet and a laser measuring tool. I turned up the volume, and the audio was crystal clear. Jasmine spun around in the center of my living room, laughing like a child in a candy store. "I cannot believe she actually bought this ugly gray sofa," she said, kicking the leg of my $40,000 Italian sectional. "We are definitely getting rid of this first. It is too cold and modern. We need something beige and comfortable for the baby." I watched in silent fury as the stranger began measuring my windows. Kyle was standing by the wall that displayed my original Basquiat painting. He waved his hand dismissively at the art. "We can knock this wall down to open up the flow," he said with the authority of a man who owned the place. "This wall is non-load-bearing. We can turn this whole area into a play zone for Leo." Then they walked into my office, my sacred workspace where I built my empire. Jasmine picked up a framed photo of me receiving my master's degree, looked at it with a sneer, and placed it face down on the desk. "This room has the best morning light," she announced. "It will make a perfect nursery. We just need to paint over this depressing blue color." My mother stood there nodding along like a bobblehead. "Do whatever you want, sweetie," she told Jasmine. "Nia will not mind. She is never here anyway, and she has no taste in interior design. This place needs a family touch." I paused the video on my mother's smiling face. My hands were not shaking. They were perfectly still on the keyboard. This happened 7 days ago. They had spent a week smiling in my face while plotting to erase my existence from my own home. They were not asking for a favor. They had already moved in mentally. They had measured my windows for drapes and planned the demolition of my walls while I was halfway across the world, earning the money to pay the mortgage. Any lingering guilt I felt about selling the apartment evaporated instantly. They wanted a renovation so badly, well, I was about to give them a demolition they would never forget. The digital clock on my trading monitors read 7 in the evening when my phone began to vibrate against the mahogany desk. The screen displayed the name Otis. It was a FaceTime request from my father. I took a deep, steadying breath and accepted the call, adjusting my expression from a ruthless traitor to a submissive daughter. My father's face filled the screen. He was sitting in his leather recliner, the one he claimed was the throne of the household. He did not waste time with small talk or ask how I was doing. He simply cleared his throat and looked at me with that stern gaze he used to use when I brought home a B on a report card. "Nia, we need to formalize the arrangement," he said, his voice booming through my high-quality speakers. "Your mother and I have been discussing the logistics, and we have decided that waiting is not an option. Jasmine is stressed in that small apartment, and stress is bad for the baby. Therefore, we are setting a hard deadline. By January 2nd, we expect you to be fully moved out of the penthouse and settled into the basement here." I remained silent, letting him dig the hole deeper. He took my silence for hesitation, and his brow furrowed. "Listen to me, Nia. This is not a suggestion. This is a directive. You are the eldest child, and it is your duty to make sacrifices for the stability of this family. You are alone. You do not need luxury. Your sister has a family to raise. We have already cleared out the boxes in the basement. It is warm and dry, and frankly, it is more than enough for someone with your limited needs. Then came the final insult. Regarding the property itself, he continued looking down at a piece of paper in his lap. You will hand over the master keys and the access codes to Kyle on New Year's Day. He will take over the property management immediately. He has big plans to optimize the space, and I do not want you interfering with his vision. Do you understand me? I felt a surge of bile rise in my throat. He was evicting me from the home I bought with my own money and ordering me to hand it over to a man who could not even pay his own car note. But I knew that if I fought back now, they would dig in their heels. They might even try to legally block a sale if they found out. I had to make them believe they had won. I pinched the skin on my thigh hard under the desk to force tears into my eyes. I lowered my head so he could only see the top of my hair. Yes, Daddy, I whispered, letting my voice crack perfectly. I understand. You are right. I have been selfish. I will have everything ready for Kyle by the 1st. I just want the family to be happy. My father nodded, visibly relaxing. His chest puffed out with the pride of a patriarch who had successfully exerted his dominance. Good girl, Nia. I knew you would do the right thing eventually. We will see you on the 1st. Do not be late. The screen went black as the call ended. I sat there for a moment in the silence of my multi-million-dollar apartment. I wiped the fake tear from my cheek and instantly returned to my trading terminal. They thought I was packing boxes to move into a damp basement. In reality, I was opening a new tab to confirm the wire transfer instructions for the sale. January 2nd was indeed going to be a memorable day, but not because I was moving out. It was because they were going to walk into an empty house that belonged to a corporation that takes no prisoners. The trap was set, and they had just walked right into the center of it. The moment the screen went black, the submissive daughter vanished completely. I stood up and walked down the hallway to my real sanctuary. It was not a bedroom or a nursery. It was a climate-controlled server room that doubled as my office. 6 high-definition monitors hummed with market data, bathing the room in a cool blue light. This was where I made my millions, and this was where I would execute my revenge. I sat down in my ergonomic chair and pulled up a contact on my encrypted phone. It was not a family member or a friend. It was Julian, the head of ultra-high net worth acquisitions for a private brokerage firm. He answered on the first ring, knowing that I never called unless money was moving. Julian, I said, keeping my voice devoid of emotion. I am ready to sell. Do you remember that unsolicited offer from the Sovereign Wealth Fund, the one representing the consortium from Qatar? Julian paused on the other end. The silence was heavy. You mean the offer you rejected 3 times because you said this was your forever home? Yes, that one, I replied. I want you to call their representative immediately. Tell them I accept the $12 million valuation, full cash offer, no contingencies, and I am selling it fully furnished. Everything stays. I could hear Julian typing furiously in the background. Nia, are you in trouble? This is a fire sale timeline. These buyers are aggressive. They are known for being legally ruthless. Once they own a property, they have zero tolerance for delays or occupants. Their legal team is sharper than a guillotine. That is exactly why I chose them, Julian, I said, staring at the live feed of the city skyline. I want a 7-day close. The deal needs to be signed, sealed, and funded by December 31st. But here is the most important clause. Vacant possession is to be granted at exactly 1 minute past midnight on January 1st. Julian whistled low. That is incredibly tight, Nia. Why the rush? I leaned back in my chair watching a complex algorithm execute a trade. Let us just say I am downsizing. I want to start the new year with a clean slate. Just make sure the contract explicitly states that the new owners have full authority to remove any unauthorized occupants immediately upon possession. I do not want to be involved in the eviction process. Understood, Julian said, his professional tone returning. I will draft the papers tonight. The fund managers are going to be ecstatic. They have been trying to acquire a foothold in this building for years. I hung up the phone and watched the city lights flicker below. My parents wanted me to hand over my keys to Kyle. They wanted me to surrender my hard-earned success to a man who mocked me. Well, I was handing the keys over all right, but I was handing them to a multi-billion-dollar international conglomerate with a private security team that made the local police look like mall cops. My family thought they were moving into a free mansion. In reality, they were about to break into a fortress owned by one of the most powerful financial entities on the planet. I tapped a key on my keyboard and authorized the electronic signature request that just popped up in my inbox. The nuclear option was launched. There was no turning back now. The next morning, I pulled into my parents' driveway wearing an old gray sweater and no makeup. I had to sell the image of the defeated daughter who had finally seen the error of her ways. The moment I walked through the front door, the atmosphere in the living room shifted from tension to smug satisfaction. They were all there, waiting like a panel of judges, ready to accept a guilty plea. My father sat in his recliner with his arms crossed, and my mother was sipping tea on the floral sofa. Kyle and Jasmine were huddled over a laptop, probably looking at furniture catalogs for a house they did not own. I kept my head down and walked to the center of the room. I took a deep breath and let my shoulders slump forward. "You were right," I said, keeping my voice soft and trembling slightly. "I did a lot of thinking last night. I realized I have been selfish holding on to all that space when Jasmine and the baby need it more. Family should help family." My mother set her teacup down with a sharp clink. Her face softened into a look of victorious pity. "Oh, Nia, I am so glad you finally came to your senses. We only want what is best for you. Living alone in that big empty box is not healthy. You will see how much happier you are down here in the basement where we can keep an eye on you." I nodded, swallowing the urge to scream. I reached into my purse and pulled out a heavy brass key ring. These were indeed keys to my front door, but they were the old set from 3 years ago, before I installed the biometric smart locks. They would turn in the cylinder, but they would not open anything. It was a useless piece of metal for a useless man. I turned to Kyle, who was watching me with a predatory grin. I held the keys out to him. "Kyle, since you are the real estate expert, I think it is best if you manage the property while I am gone. I trust you to take care of it better than I could." Kyle stood up and practically snatched the keys from my hand. He weighed them in his palm as if he were holding a scepter. "Now you are talking sense, Nia." He walked over and patted me on the shoulder a little too hard. "Do not worry, I have already drafted a maintenance schedule. That place has been neglected under your ownership, but I will whip it into shape. I might even list it for a short-term rental when we go on vacation to maximize the yield. You really should have come to me for advice years ago." Jasmine squealed and ran over to hug Kyle, looking at the keys like they were the holy grail. "Oh, Kyle, we can finally host the New Year party properly." She turned to me with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Thanks, Nia. Just make sure you clean the carpets before you go. I do not want Leo crawling on dust." I forced a tight smile. "Of course. I will leave it spotless." My father grunted his approval from the corner. "See? Was that so hard?" This is how a family operates. Everyone plays their role. I looked around the room at the 4 people who claimed to love me while stripping me of my dignity. They were so blinded by their greed they did not notice that I was not crying. I was calculating. I had just handed them the keys to a kingdom that had already been conquered by someone else. As I walked out the door, Kyle was already clipping the keys to his belt loop, jangling them loudly. He had no idea he was wearing the evidence of his own stupidity. The trap was set and the cheese was in place. Now all I had to do was wait for the mouse to snap the trap. The next 24 hours were a masterclass in audacity. I sat in my home office pretending to sort through files, but in reality, I was watching my phone screen light up with notification after notification from Jasmine. Now that she had the keys and the assurance that I was leaving, the floodgates of her greed had burst wide open. She was no longer just claiming my square footage. She was itemizing my personal property, like she was shopping on Amazon with a stolen credit card. The first text came through at noon, attached to a blurry photo she had secretly taken of my walk-in closet during their invasion last week. Hey Nia, since you are moving to mom and dad's basement, you obviously will not have room for your bag collection. I really need a diaper bag that looks chic. I am going to borrow that black Hermes Birkin. It is just gathering dust anyway, and it matches my stroller. I stared at the screen. That bag was a $30,000 investment piece I had bought in Paris after closing my first eight-figure trade. She wanted to use it to carry spit-up rags and crushed Cheerios. Before I could even process the insult, a second text bubbled up. Also, Kyle was asking about the sound system in the living room. He says those Bang & Olufsen speakers are too complex for you to uninstall, and he does not want holes in the walls. Just leave them. He wants to listen to his jazz collection when we entertain. The entitlement was so thick I could practically taste it. They were stripping me for parts. In their minds, I was already a corpse, and they were the vultures picking the bones clean. They did not just want my home. They wanted my lifestyle. They wanted to cosplay as rich, successful people using the trophies of my hard work. I typed out a reply, my fingers flying across the glass screen. Sure, Jasmine. You are right. I do not need any of it where I am going. I will leave the bags, the shoes, and the sound system. I am only taking my clothes and my laptop. Consider it a housewarming gift. I hit send and watched the read receipt appear, instantly followed by a string of heart emojis and a text that said, "You are the best sister ever." Finally, I set the phone down and let out a dry, dark laugh. She had no idea how true my text actually was. I really was leaving everything behind, but not for her. The contract with the investment fund was explicit. The sale included all fixtures, furnishings, and decor. The price tag of $12 million covered every fork, every speaker, and every designer bag in that closet. I could not take them even if I wanted to. By telling Jasmine she could have them, I was setting her up for a devastating collision with reality. When the new owners arrived, they would have a legal bill of sale listing every single item she was drooling over. If she tried to walk out the door with that Birkin bag, she would not just be evicted. She would be arrested for grand larceny. I leaned back in my chair and took a sip of water. Enjoy the fantasy while it lasts, little sister. The reality check is coming express delivery. Later that evening, Kyle held court at a downtown gastropub frequented by mid-tier real estate agents. The air smelled of truffle fries and desperation, but tonight, Kyle smelled like victory. He was surrounded by three of his college buddies, guys who wore similar blue suits and shared his inflated sense of self-importance. Kyle signaled the waitress for another round of expensive IPAs on his credit card, of course. He leaned in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was loud enough for half the bar to hear. You guys are not going to believe this. I finally secured the asset I have been telling you about. The penthouse on the 51st floor. The one with the 360-degree view of the lake. One of his friends looked skeptical. No way, man. That is the Blackwood building. You told us your sister-in-law owns that. Did she finally agree to list it with you? Kyle threw his head back and laughed, a sound that was equal parts arrogance and cruelty. List it? No. Better. She gave it to me. Handed over the keys this morning. She is moving into her parents' basement to help out with the family. The table erupted in disbelief. Are you serious? She just walked away from a $10 million property? Kyle took a long swig of his beer and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Listen. Nia is a sweet girl, but she is simple. She sits behind a computer screen all day. She has zero social intelligence. I told her the market was crashing and that living there was actually hurting her equity. She bought it hook, line, and sinker. I played the dutiful brother-in-law card, told her I would manage the asset for her. He pulled the brass keys from his pocket and slammed them onto the sticky wooden table. The heavy metal made a satisfying thud. Gentlemen, you are looking at the new headquarters of Kyle's Premier Realty. Imagine the clients I can pull when I bring them up to that living room. I will not just be living there. I am going to stage it as my own private office. When high net worth individuals see me in that environment, They will assume I am one of them. They will sign exclusivity contracts before I even pour the scotch. His friends looked at the keys with naked envy. You are a genius, Kyle. That is free overhead on a luxury showroom. Kyle nodded, basking in their admiration. It is not just genius. It is natural selection. Some people are built to own things, and some people are built to step aside. Nia was just keeping the seat warm for me. She does not know how to leverage power. She thinks she is doing a good deed. By the time she realizes I have turned her home into my business operations center, it will be too late. I will have established tenancy and business use. She will never get me out. He raised his glass for a toast. To the simple-minded, may they always have expensive taste and gullible hearts. The glasses clinked together. Kyle felt like the king of the world. He had no idea that the keys sitting in a puddle of condensation on the table were for locks that no longer existed. He was celebrating a victory in a war that he had already lost. While he was spending money, he did not have to impress friends who did not care. Nia was finalizing the paperwork that would turn his dream headquarters into a crime scene. The conference room at the law firm was cold, sterile, and smelled of expensive leather. While Kyle was likely nursing a hangover from his night of premature celebration, I was sitting across from three men in bespoke suits who represented the Qatari Investment Consortium. The lead attorney, Mr. Al-Hassan, did not offer me coffee or small talk. He slid a document across the polished mahogany table that was thick enough to be a novel. This was the closing agreement for $12 million cash. Mr. Al-Hassan adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses and tapped a specific paragraph on page 42. Williams, before you sign, we need to be absolutely clear about the possession clause. Our clients are acquiring this asset for high-level diplomatic use. We require absolute vacancy. I leaned forward and looked him in the eye. I understand completely. I will be fully moved out by tomorrow night. The unit will be empty. Mr. Al-Hassan nodded, but his expression remained severe. It is not just about you moving out. He turned the page to highlight a section in bold text. At exactly 1 minute past midnight on January 1st, ownership transfers to the consortium. At that precise moment, our private security detail will secure the perimeter. They are authorized to detain and remove any unauthorized persons found on the premises. We will press immediate criminal trespassing charges against anyone who does not have diplomatic clearance. There will be no warnings and no civil disputes. This will be a police matter. Do you understand the gravity of this? A small, satisfied smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. I thought about Kyle strutting around with his useless keys. I thought about Jasmine planning her nursery. They believed they were moving into a family home. In reality, they were about to break into a fortress protected by international corporate law. I understand perfectly, I said, picking up the heavy fountain pen. In fact, I am counting on it. I signed my name on the dotted line. The scratch of the pen against the paper was the only sound in the room. With each loop of my signature, I felt a weight lifting off my chest. I was not just selling a condo, I was signing a death warrant for my family's entitlement. I pushed the papers back across the table. Mr. Al-Hassan checked the signature and finally cracked a thin, professional smile. Excellent. The funds have already been wired to your offshore account. Pleasure doing business with you, Ms. Williams. I stood up and shook his hand. The pleasure is all mine. I walked out of that glass office with $12 million in the bank and a ticking time bomb waiting for my brother-in-law. The countdown had officially begun. While I was finalizing the sale of the Century, Jasmine and Kyle were busy destroying their own safety net. I found out later through a series of manic Instagram stories that Jasmine posted throughout the day. She was filming herself in her cramped living room, surrounded by garbage bags and half-empty boxes. She held up her phone to the mirror, posing with a peace sign, and captioned it, "Goodbye squalor, hello luxury." The background was chaotic. Instead of carefully packing their belongings, they were indiscriminately tossing things into a dumpster rental they had parked on the street. In one video, Kyle was dragging their perfectly functional sofa out the front door. He looked at the camera and laughed, saying, We do not need this particle board trash anymore. We are upgrading to real leather, baby. He shoved the couch over the railing and let it crash onto the sidewalk below, shattering the frame. They were not just moving, they were purging their old life with a level of arrogance that was terrifying to watch. They were treating their own possessions like garbage because they believed they were about to inherit my kingdom. Then came the pièce de résistance. Jasmine posted a screenshot of an email she had just sent to their current landlord. The subject line read, "Lease termination effective immediately." She had written a scathing message telling him that they were moving on to bigger and better things and that he could keep the security deposit because they did not need his pocket change. She effectively paid a penalty to be homeless. They had voluntarily severed the only legal tie they had to a roof over their heads. I watched these updates from my office with a mixture of disbelief and dark amusement. It was like watching someone saw off the branch they were sitting on while bragging about how they were learning to fly. They were so intoxicated by the idea of living in my penthouse that they did not stop to think about a backup plan. They were burning the boats before they even reached the shore. Jasmine sent me a text a few minutes later. "Hey sis, just wanted to let you know we are all packed up. We threw away most of our old junk, so the penthouse better be ready for us. Do not forget to leave the Wi-Fi password on the fridge." I stared at the message. They had no furniture. They had no lease. And in 48 hours, they would have no sister to bail them out. They were walking towards a cliff edge, blindfolded and sprinting. I typed back a single thumbs-up emoji. It was the only response I could manage without revealing the absolute catastrophe that was heading their way. They were high on greed and the crash was going to be fatal. The night of December 30th was surreal. My parents insisted on hosting a family dinner which they branded as a farewell party for me. In reality, it was a premature victory lap for Jasmine and Kyle. The dining room table was set with the good china and my mother had roasted a prime rib. They were treating this like a coronation. Jasmine sat at the head of the table, a spot usually reserved for my father, beaming like she had just won a Nobel Prize. Kyle was pouring expensive wine that I am 90% sure they stole from my wine cellar during their unauthorized visit last week. The conversation revolved entirely around their plans for my home. Kyle was loudly explaining to my father how he intended to convert my library into a man cave with a pool table. Jasmine was discussing which of my rugs she would throw away because they did not match her aura. I sat there cutting my meat into tiny precision squares, pretending to be the submissive daughter they wanted to see. I nodded at the right times and forced a smile when they made jokes about how much happier I would be living a simple life. Then came the moment that perfectly encapsulated my place in this family. My mother Joyce stood up, tapping her glass with a spoon. "Nia, we know this is a big change for you moving back home at your age, but we want you to know we support you. We found this in the attic and thought it would be perfect for your move." She reached behind the credenza and pulled out a suitcase. It was not a new piece of luggage. It was a battered tweed suitcase from the 80s with a broken handle and a zipper that was barely holding together. It smelled of mothballs and neglect. I stared at the object. They were taking my $12 million sanctuary and giving me literal garbage in return. My mother pushed it toward me with a benevolent smile. "It is sturdy," she said. "Oh, and when you get down to the basement tonight, you might want to do a deep clean. There are some spider webs in the corners and the floor is a bit gritty. We have not been down there in years. Make sure it is spotless before you unpack. We do not want you tracking dust upstairs." Jasmine giggled. "Yeah, Naya, do not be messy. You know how Mom hates dirt." I reached out and took the suitcase. The handle felt rough against my palm. This was their vision of my future. A middle-aged woman living in a dirty basement scrubbing floors while they lived like royalty in the sky. It was the ultimate humiliation, but it was also the ultimate fuel. "Thank you, Mom," I said, my voice steady. "This is exactly what I deserve." I stood up and grabbed the handle of the decrepit suitcase. "I am going to head over to the apartment now to finish packing. I want everything to be ready for you guys." My father nodded. barely looking up from his steak. Good. Make sure you leave the keys on the counter. We will be there first thing in the morning on the 2nd. I walked out of that house into the freezing December wind, dragging the empty, broken suitcase behind me. The cold air bit at my cheeks, but I felt hot with anticipation. They thought I was going to pack my life into that trash. They had no idea that I was about to execute the most precise disappearance act in history. The party was over, and the hangover was going to be lethal. At 3 o'clock in the morning, the city of Chicago was finally asleep, but my penthouse was a hive of silent, calculated activity. I had hired a specialized relocation service known in high net worth circles as the Ghosts. These were not your average movers with beer bellies and loud tape guns. This was a tactical team of 6 professionals dressed in black from head to toe, wearing soft-soled tactical boots to ensure absolute silence on the marble floors. They arrived in unmarked matte black vans that slipped into the service loading dock unnoticed by the sleeping concierge. I stood in the center of the living room, sipping a double espresso, watching them work. It was like watching a ballet performed by cat burglars. They moved with military precision. Their instructions were clear and uncompromising. Extract only personal effects documents and digital hardware. Leave everything else. They wrapped my clothing in silk paper and placed them into waterproof crates. My server racks containing the proprietary trading algorithms that built this fortune were disconnected and crated with extreme care. These hard drives were the only things in this apartment that truly mattered to me. As the hours ticked by, the apartment began to undergo a terrifying transformation. It was losing its soul. The framed photos of the few friends I actually trusted were removed, leaving the shelves perfectly staged with impersonal art books. The personalized stationery was swept off the desk. My toothbrush, my favorite mug, and the throw blanket I used while reading were all spirited away. What remained was cold, hard luxury. The $12 million view was still there. The Italian leather sofas were still there. The Bang & Olufsen speakers that Kyle coveted were still mounted on the walls. But the warmth was gone. The space no longer smelled like my lavender candles or my morning coffee. It smelled of industrial cleaner and emptiness. I walked into the master closet, which was now just a showroom. The Hermes Birkin bag that Jasmine had demanded was sitting on the top shelf, bathed in the LED under cabinet lighting. It looked beautiful and lonely. I reached up and touched the cool leather one last time. Leaving it behind felt counterintuitive, but it was a necessary piece of the trap. It was the cheese in the mousetrap. I needed the apartment to look fully furnished and ready for living, so that when they walked in, they would feel an overwhelming sense of victory right before the axe fell. By 4:45, the operation was complete. The team leader, a man who had not spoken a single word since arriving, gave me a curt nod. They wheeled the last black crate into the service elevator, and the doors slid shut. I was left alone in a space that looked exactly like a model home in a luxury brochure. It was beautiful, expensive, and completely devoid of a heartbeat. I walked through the rooms one last time, checking for any stray evidence of my existence. A forgotten receipt, a hair tie, nothing. I had successfully erased myself from the narrative. When my family walked in here tomorrow, they would not find a home. They would find a stage set for a tragedy, and they were the unsuspecting actors about to walk out for their final curtain call. The silence in the apartment was absolute. With the movers gone and the furniture stripped of all personal touches, the penthouse felt like a cryogenic chamber. The only light came from the master control panel mounted on the hallway wall. This tablet was the nervous system of the entire property, controlling everything from the climate to the biometric locks. I stood before it, ready to perform the final lobotomy. I tapped the screen and navigated to the user access menu. The list of authorized names mocked me in glowing white text. Mom had full administrative privileges. Dad had emergency override access. There was even a dormant guest code I had generated for Jasmine 3 Christmases ago. I did not just delete them. I erased them. I tapped the trash icon next to my mother's profile. The system flashed a warning asking if I was sure I wanted to revoke administrative access for Joyce Williams. I did not hesitate for a microsecond. I pressed confirm. Her name vanished. I did the same for my father. Then I navigated to the biometric database. I wiped every fingerprint, every facial recognition scan, and every voice command protocol. I was systematically scrubbing their digital footprints from the property. Even if they had a physical key, which they did, the smart lock system would now treat them like hostile intruders. The house would not just deny them entry, it would flag them as security threats. For the final step, I initiated a complete factory reset of the home automation system. The screen went black for a moment before rebooting with the generic manufacturer logo. The house was now a blank slate. It had no memory of me, and more importantly, no memory of them. When the Qatari security team arrived in less than 24 hours, they would program their own military-grade encryption. My family would be trying to break into a fortress that did not know their names. I walked into the kitchen where the 12-foot marble island gleamed under the recessed lighting. It was empty except for one item I had deliberately purchased for this moment. I reached into my bag and pulled out a bottle of sparkling wine. It was not Dom Perignon or Moet. It was a $5 bottle of sugary mass-produced swill that I had picked up at a gas station convenience store. It was the kind of headache-inducing alcohol that tasted like cheap regret. I placed it squarely in the center of the island. Next to it, I placed a single sheet of yellow-lined paper. I had written just 2 words in black Sharpie. Welcome home. It was the perfect housewarming gift. Cheap, flashy, and ultimately disappointing, just like the victory they thought they had won. I took one last look around the expansive living room. I did not feel a pang of loss. I did not feel sentimental about the view or the memories. I felt the lightness of a prisoner walking out of a cell. I turned my back on the skyline, walked to the private elevator, and pressed the button for the garage. As the heavy steel doors slid shut, sealing the penthouse away, I checked my watch. The sun was just beginning to rise over Lake Michigan. The stage was set, the props were in place, and the actors were about to arrive. I was just glad I would be 5,000 miles away when the curtain finally fell. The sun rose on New Year's Day, illuminating the frost on the streets of Chicago. At exactly 9 in the morning, the silence of the exclusive luxury that defined my building was shattered. It did not start with a bang. It started with the screech of brakes from a battered orange rental truck that looked like a giant rust stain against the pristine white marble of the entrance. Behind the wheel sat Kyle wearing an electric blue suit that was 2 sizes too tight, and a pair of aviator sunglasses that cost $5 at a gas station. He honked the horn twice, not because there was traffic, but because he wanted to announce his arrival. To him, this was not just a move, it was a coronation. My parents followed close behind in their sedan with Jasmine in the passenger seat. The trunk was tied shut with a bungee cord because it was overflowing with boxes of baby toys and kitchen appliances they had salvaged from the trash heap of their old life. From the security feed on my phone, 5,000 miles away, I watched the circus pull into town. It was almost comical. The building was home to diplomats, tech moguls, and heirs to oil fortunes. And here was my family looking like the Beverly Hillbillies, but with none of the charm and all of the entitlement. Kyle jumped out of the driver's seat, leaving the massive truck idling in the middle of the circular driveway blocking a polished black limousine. The head valet, a man named Arthur who had worked there for 20 years, stepped forward with a polite but confused expression. "Sir, you cannot park a commercial vehicle here. The loading dock is around the back on Wabash Avenue." Kyle laughed, a loud barking sound that echoed off the glass facade. He walked right up to Arthur and tossed the keys to the rental truck at him. Arthur was so startled he let them hit his chest and fall to the ground. Kyle did not even look down. "Park it for me, Chief," Kyle said, snapping his fingers. "And get a team to start unloading the back. Be careful with the leather recliner. It is vintage. I am the new owner of the penthouse on 51. The name is Kyle, but you can call me Mr. Sterling." Arthur looked down at the keys on the pavement and then back at Kyle. His face remained impassive, but I knew that look. It was the look of a man who knew exactly who owned every square inch of this building, and Kyle was not on the list. "I am afraid I do not have a Mr. Sterling on the registry, sir," Arthur said calmly, ignoring the keys on the ground. "And we do not provide unloading services for rentals. You need to move this vehicle immediately." Kyle stepped closer, invading the valet's personal space. "Listen to me, Grandpa. Nia Williams transferred this property to me. I have the keys right here." He patted his pocket. "Now stop wasting my time and get my stuff upstairs before I have you fired. I want the nursery set up before lunch." Jasmine climbed out of the car, holding little Leo on her hip. She was wearing a white fur coat that I recognized as a knockoff she bought online. She waved at the doorman like she was royalty greeting her subjects. "Come on, Kyle, do not argue with the help. Let us just go up and let them figure it out." Kyle sneered at Arthur one last time. "You heard the lady. Figure it out." He stepped over the truck keys, leaving them on the asphalt, and marched toward the revolving glass doors with my parents and Jasmine trailing behind him like a flock of confused geese. They walked with their chins high, completely unaware that they were marching directly into a buzzsaw. They thought the resistance from the valet was just bad service. They had no idea it was the first warning shot of a war they had already lost. The elevator doors slid shut, sealing my family inside a box of gold-plated steel and mirrors. It was a tight squeeze. My father was complaining about the air conditioning while Jasmine was trying to shush a crying Leo who was clearly overheating in his snowsuit. Kyle stood by the control panel, assuming the posture of a captain steering a ship. He pulled the keycard from his pocket with a flourish, twirling it between his fingers before pressing it against the sensor. He reached for the button marked Penthouse, waiting for it to light up and whisk them away to their new life of unearned luxury. Nothing happened. A harsh electronic buzz filled the small space, followed by a flashing red light on the panel. "Access denied." Kyle frowned. "That is weird," he muttered. He wiped the card on his polyester jacket, thinking it was just a smudge, and swiped it again. This time he did it slower, as if explaining the process to the machine. Buzz, red light, access denied. The elevator remained stationary on the ground floor. The silence in the car began to shift from anticipation to annoyance. My mother adjusted her fur collar and sighed loudly. "Kyle, stop playing around. We have frozen goods in the cooler and the ice is melting. Just get us up there." "I am trying, Joyce." Kyle snapped, losing his cool facade for a second. "This stupid system must be glitching. Nia probably forgot to update the firmware or something. She is so incompetent with technology." He jammed the card against the reader repeatedly, his frustration mounting with every rejection. Beep. Buzz. 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 It was the sound of his authority crumbling in real time. The smell of cheap cologne and rising panic began to fill the air. Jasmine shifted the baby to her other hip, her patience wearing thin. "Just call her Kyle. Ask her for the manual override code. She probably changed it and forgot to tell us." Kyle pulled out his phone, his face turning a shade of red that matched the error light on the panel. He dialed my number on speakerphone so everyone could hear him reprimand me. The line rang once, then twice. Then it clicked over. "You have reached Nia. I am currently unavailable and will not be checking messages." "Damn it!" Kyle yelled, kicking the metal door with his dress shoe. The loud clang made the baby scream even harder. She turned her phone off. "Who does that on moving day? She is doing this on purpose to annoy me." My father wiped sweat from his forehead. "Well, do not just stand there, son. We cannot stay in here all day. Go talk to that valet again or find a building manager. Fix this." Kyle looked at the keypad one last time, his eyes wide with a dawning panic he refused to admit. He slammed his hand against the open door button. The doors slid apart, revealing the lobby they had just left. They had not moved an inch. The elevator was not broken. It was working perfectly. It was simply refusing to take the trash to the top floor. The elevator doors opened back onto the lobby floor with a cheerful chime that felt like a mockery. The ride down had been suffocating. Kyle stormed out first, his face a mask of furious entitlement. He marched straight to the concierge desk, slamming his fist on the pristine white marble surface so hard that a crystal vase of lilies rattled. My parents followed him, looking less like proud homeowners and more like confused tourists who had lost their luggage. Jasmine trailed behind, trying to soothe a screaming Leo while shooting death glares at the residents sitting in the lounge area. "Listen to me, you incompetent idiots!" Kyle shouted, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Your elevator is broken. My keycard is not working, and I have a truck full of furniture blocking your driveway. I want the service elevator opened immediately, and I want a manager to apologize to me personally for this inconvenience." The young receptionist flinched, but before she could stammer out an apology, a deep baritone voice cut through the noise like a knife. "Lower your voice, sir. This is a private residence, not a fish market." Kyle spun around ready to fight. Standing behind him was Marcus, the head of building security. Marcus was 6'4", a former linebacker who wore his bespoke black suit like armor. I had known Marcus for 5 years. I tipped him well at Christmas and asked about his daughter's college applications. To me, he was a friend. To Kyle, he was a wall of muscle that was not going to move. Kyle puffed out his chest, trying to look intimidating but failing miserably. "Do not tell me what to do. I am Mr. Sterling, the owner of the penthouse on 51. I demand you fix my access card right now." Marcus did not blink. He stepped forward, his hands clasped calmly behind his back. "Mr. Sterling, I am afraid there has been a misunderstanding. You are not the owner of the penthouse. In fact, according to our updated registry as of midnight last night, there is no resident named Nia Williams in this building anymore." My mother gasped, clutching her pearls. "What are you talking about?" "Of course she lives here. She is my daughter. She gave us the keys yesterday." Marcus turned his gaze to my mother. His expression was polite but devoid of warmth. "Mom, I do not know what personal arrangements you had, but legally speaking, Unit 5001 was sold. The transaction closed yesterday. The new ownership is a corporate entity, and they have strictly explicitly instructed us that the unit is to remain vacant for security sweeps." Kyle let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. "That is a lie. Nia is playing a prank. Look, I have the keys." He shoved the brass keyring into Marcus' face. "See? These are the keys to the front door." Marcus looked down at the old brass keys with pity. "Sir, the penthouse has been equipped with biometric scanners for 3 years. Those keys would not open a janitor closet in this building. You are currently trespassing on private property and disrupting the peace. I suggest you take your family and your truck and leave before I am forced to escalate this situation." The lobby went silent. The other residents lowered their newspapers to watch the show. For the first time, the reality of the situation began to crack through Kyle's arrogance. He looked at the useless metal in his hand, then back at the stone-faced security chief. He realized he was holding the physical proof of his own gullibility, but his ego was too big to let him back down. He made the fatal mistake of doubling down on his delusion. My mother Joyce looked as if she had been slapped across the face. She stepped out from behind Kyle, her hands trembling so violently that her designer purse slipped from her shoulder and hit the marble floor. She did not even look down to pick it up. Her eyes were bulging, almost popping out of her head as she screamed at the head of security. "Sold? What do you mean, sold? That is impossible. That is my daughter's apartment. She was just at our house yesterday. She gave us the keys. She promised to lend it to her sister for the baby." "You are lying. Check your computer again." Marcus did not flinch at her screeching tone. He simply tapped the tablet he was holding and turned the screen around so she could see the official property record. "Ma'am, I assure you I do not make mistakes regarding the registry of this building. As you can see right here, the title was transferred to the Qatari Sovereign Investment Group at 11:59 last night. Nia Williams is no longer a resident here. She has vacated the premises." My father Otis stumbled forward, clutching his chest. His face had turned a sickly shade of gray. "But we sold our furniture." He stammered, his voice weak and confused. "We gave up the lease on Jasmine's apartment. We have nowhere to go. She cannot just sell it without telling us. We are her parents." While my parents were spiraling into a panic attack, Kyle decided to play his final card. He whipped out his cracked iPhone and frantically scrolled through his messages until he found the last conversation with me. He shoved the screen within an inch of Marcus's nose. "I do not care what your computer says," Kyle shouted, saliva flying from his mouth. "This right here is a binding verbal contract. Look, I told her we were moving in, and she sent a thumbs-up emoji. In the state of Illinois, that constitutes an agreement of tenancy. She acknowledged our occupancy. That makes us tenants, and you cannot lock tenants out without a 30-day eviction notice. I know the law, buddy. I am in real estate." Marcus looked down at the phone screen with an expression of absolute disdain. He did not even touch the device. "Sir, you are showing me a cartoon thumb. That is not a lease. That is not a deed. And it certainly does not supersede the $12 million closing contract that was filed with the city this morning. Furthermore, the new owners have invoked the Diplomatic Security Act. They do not need to evict you because you never lived here. You are simply intruders trying to break into a foreign asset." Kyle turned purple. "I am going to sue you. I am going to sue this building, and I am going to sue Nia. Call the police. I want to file a report." Marcus smiled a cold, dangerous smile. "I already called them, Mr. Sterling. But they are not coming to help you file a report. They are coming to remove a disturbance. And judging by the sirens I hear approaching, they will be here in about 30 seconds." For the first time, the reality of the situation pierced through my mother's delusion. She looked at the pile of boxes on the truck outside, then at the crying baby, and finally at the stoic security guard. The realization hit her like a physical blow. They were homeless, they were humiliated, and the daughter they had treated like a servant had just checkmated them from 5,000 miles away. The revolving doors spun slowly, and the atmosphere in the lobby shifted instantly from chaotic to clinical. Two police officers entered first, their hands resting near their belts, followed closely by a man who looked like he owned the entire city block. It was Mr. Al-Hassan, the attorney I had met yesterday, flanked by two more private security contractors who were twice the size of Marcus. He didn't look at my screaming mother or my red-faced brother-in-law. He looked at the scene with the detached annoyance of someone finding a stain on an expensive rug. "Officer, these are the individuals attempted to breach the perimeter," Marcus said, stepping aside to let the law take over. Kyle, seeing the police, immediately tried to spin the narrative. He smoothed down his cheap blue suit and stepped forward, putting on his best salesman smile. "Officers, thank God you are here. I am the victim. These people are denying me access to my property. I have a truck full of furniture outside and a verbal contract with the previous owner." Mr. Al-Hassan stepped forward, cutting Kyle off with a voice as sharp as a razor. "Officer, my name is Malik Al-Hassan, representing the Qatari Sovereign Investment Consortium. We are the sole legal owners of Penthouse 5001 as of midnight last night." He opened a leather portfolio and produced a deed stamped with the official city seal. "Here is the title transfer, the bill of sale, and the vacancy affidavit signed by the seller, Ms. Nia Williams. These individuals have absolutely no claim to this property." The police officer took the documents, scanning them quickly. He looked from the crisp, notarized legal papers to Kyle's sweaty face and the screenshot of the thumbs-up emoji he was still holding. "Sir," the officer said to Kyle, his voice dropping an octave, "do you have a lease, a deed, a utility bill in your name?" "No, but she said—" Kyle stammered, pointing at the phone. The officer shook his head. "Verbal agreements don't supersede a title deed, son. And right now, the owner of this building is telling me you are trespassing." Mr. Al-Hassan adjusted his cuffs. "We are not just alleging trespassing, officer. This is a diplomatic asset. Attempted forced entry into a property owned by a foreign sovereign entity is a serious offense. We are prepared to press charges for criminal trespassing, disturbance of the peace, and harassment of our security staff. We want them removed. Now." My mother let out a strangled sob. "Criminal charges." We are a respectable family. My husband is a deacon. We just wanted to move in. Mr. Al-Hassan finally looked at her. Madam, you are trying to move into a $12 million residence that does not belong to you. In the eyes of the law, that is not moving in. That is a home invasion. Kyle looked around, desperate for an ally, but the walls were closing in. The reality of the situation was finally piercing his thick skull. He wasn't arguing with a sister-in-law he could bully. He was arguing with a multinational corporation backed by the full force of the Chicago Police Department. And for the first time in his life, he looked small. The air in the lobby was thick with tension, but for Kyle Sterling it was thick with the smoke of his burning ego. He looked from the calm face of Mr. Al-Hassan to the stony expression of the police officer, and something inside him snapped. He was a white man in a bespoke suit. He was a real estate expert. He was the golden son-in-law. He was not someone who got told no by a security guard and a piece of paper. The humiliation was too much to process. His face turned a dangerous shade of crimson, and the veins in his neck bulged against his tight collar. "You are all in on it," Kyle screamed, his voice cracking. "This is fraud. That document is a forgery. Naya put you up to this. Sir, you need to calm down or you will be detained," the officer said, stepping forward and raising a hand to create distance. "Do not tell me to calm down," Kyle roared. "I am the victim here. I have rights." He lunged forward, intending to grab the deed from Mr. Al-Hassan's hand to tear it up. The police officer instinctively stepped in the path to block him. In a moment of blind rage, Kyle made the biggest mistake of his life. He raised both hands and shoved the officer hard in the chest. "Get out of my way." The reaction was instantaneous. The officer did not stumble. He did not argue. He simply reacted with the muscle memory of 10 years on the force. He grabbed Kyle's wrist, twisted it behind his back, and swept his leg. There was a sickening thud as Kyle's body hit the polished marble floor. His sunglasses skittered across the tiles, stopping at the feet of a horrified elderly resident. Before Kyle could even draw a breath to scream, the officer had his knee pressed firmly into the small of Kyle's back. "Stop resisting," the officer shouted. "I am not resisting. Get off me, do you know who I am?" Kyle squealed, his face pressed against the cold stone floor, his expensive suit gathering dust. "You are under arrest for assaulting a police officer and disorderly conduct," the officer recited calmly, pulling a pair of metal cuffs from his belt. The sound of the ratcheting metal clicking shut around Kyle's wrists echoed through the silent lobby like a gunshot. Jasmine let out a piercing shriek, clutching Leo so tight the baby started to wail again. "Kyle. Oh my God. You are hurting him. Let him go." Kyle struggled against the cuffs, but he was pinned. He looked up from his vantage point on the floor. He saw the shoes of the residents he wanted to impress. He saw the shiny loafers of Mr. Al-Hassan. And he saw the disgusted look on Arthur the valet's face. The man who had strutted in here 10 minutes ago demanding respect was now being scraped off the floor like gum. Mr. Al-Hassan looked down at Kyle with zero sympathy. "I believe we are done here. Officer, please remove this individual from our property." The officer hauled Kyle to his feet. Kyle's hair was a mess, his suit was twisted, and his dignity was gone. He looked around wildly, looking for someone to save him, but his eyes only met the cold lenses of cell phone cameras recording his downfall. The king of the castle was being dragged out in chains, and the show was just getting started. As the automatic doors swallowed Kyle and the police officers, the silence in the lobby broke. It was not shattered by a gunshot, but by the high-pitched wail of my sister. Jasmine did not just cry, she unraveled. She collapsed onto a velvet bench near the entrance, clutching Leo, who was screaming in harmony with his mother. "This cannot be happening," she shrieked, tears streaming down her face, and ruining the contouring she had spent an hour perfecting. She looked around wild-eyed and frantic. "Where are they taking him? We have to go up. We have to call a lawyer. Arthur." The head valet approached the group. He did not offer a tissue. He did not offer sympathy. He offered a logistical ultimatum. "Ma'am," he said, Addressing my shell shocked mother. The rental truck outside is blocking a fire lane and impeding resident access. You have exactly 5 minutes to move it, or I will have it towed at the owner's expense. I have a tow truck on speed dial and they are very efficient. My parents stood there like statues carved out of shame. Joyce, who always prided herself on being the matriarch of a respectable family, was now the center of a circus. She looked around and saw the worst possible thing. Smartphones. Teenage residents and bored socialites were holding up their phones, recording every second of the meltdown. The lens of a stranger's iPhone was capturing her daughter's hysteria and her son-in-law's arrest. This was not just a bad day. This was a viral moment in the making. Otis, do something, Joyce hissed, grabbing my father's arm, her fingernails digging into his coat. Everyone is looking at us. Get the truck. We have to leave. But Otis was paralyzed. The man who had sternly ordered me to move into a basement just 48 hours ago could not even look the valet in the eye. He looked old and defeated. His chest heaved as he stared at the revolving doors where his golden boy had just been dragged out in handcuffs. Jasmine looked up, her eyes red and swollen. We cannot leave. We have nowhere to go. We threw everything away. She turned to my mother, grabbing her coat. Call Nia. She did this. She is a witch. She set us up. She screamed my name like a curse word, but it held no power here. Arthur checked his watch. 4 minutes, he announced coldly. My father finally snapped out of his trance. He bent down and snatched the truck keys from the floor where Kyle had dropped them. His hand was shaking. Come on, Jasmine, he muttered, his voice low and raspy. Get up, we are leaving. But, Jasmine sobbed. Now Otis roared, startling the baby into silence. He marched toward the door, his head hung low, trying to shield his face from the cameras. My mother grabbed Jasmine by the arm, dragging her and the baby toward the exit. They looked like refugees of their own greed. As they stumbled out into the biting wind toward the rusty U-Haul truck, the warmth of the lobby seemed to reject them. They were leaving the world of the elite and heading back to the reality they had tried so desperately to cheat. The glass doors spun shut behind them, sealing the fortress once again. 5,000 miles away from the chaos of the lobby, I was sitting in the sanctuary of the first-class lounge at O'Hare International Airport. The air here smelled of expensive leather and quiet privilege. My phone, however, was vibrating so violently against the marble side table that it was inching toward the edge. I glanced at the screen. 90 missed calls, 52 text messages, 14 voicemails. The names flashed in a desperate strobe light pattern. Mom, Dad, Jasmine, Mom again. The battery was draining just from the sheer volume of their panic. I did not reach for the decline button. I simply let it buzz while I swirled the vintage Krug champagne in my crystal flute. The bubbles rose to the surface just like the panic was rising in my family. I took a slow, deliberate sip, savoring the crisp taste of victory. It was cold and dry, perfectly matching my mood. I unlocked the phone and bypassed the call screen to open a hidden folder. I tapped on the building security app. I had wiped their access codes and biometric data, but I had certainly kept a ghost backdoor administrator account for myself for exactly this moment. The live feed loaded in high definition on my screen. It was better than any reality TV show because I had written the script. I watched the silent footage from the exterior camera. It was a masterpiece of disaster. I saw my father trying to wrestle the keys to that ridiculous orange U-Haul truck, his posture slumped in defeat. I saw my mother arguing with the air, her arms flailing as she likely screamed at the valet who was ignoring her. I saw Jasmine sitting on the curb looking small and defeated, wiping mascara from her cheeks while the baby kicked in her lap. And finally, I scrolled back a few minutes to watch the highlight reel. The moment Kyle was put into the back of the squad car, I zoomed in on his face. The arrogance was gone. He looked terrified. A flight attendant approached me with a warm smile. Ms. Williams, we are ready to board for Tokyo now. I nodded and downed the rest of the champagne. I looked at the phone one last time as my father's name popped up again. He was probably calling to beg, to demand, or to ask for money to bail Kyle out. I did not just decline the call. I powered the device off completely. The screen went black and the vibration stopped. The connection was severed. I stood up, grabbed my carry-on, and walked toward the jet bridge. The show was over, and I had a plane to catch. They were on their own now, in the cold reality of a Chicago winter, while I was chasing the sun. The neon sign outside the Starlight Motel flickered with a maddening buzzing sound that seemed to drill directly into the room. We were less than 10 miles from the Gold Coast of the city, but it felt like we had landed on a different planet. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and industrial lemon cleaner, a combination that made the stomach turn. There were 2 queen beds covered in scratchy polyester spreads that looked like they had not been updated since the 90s. This was our penthouse now. A 300-square-foot box with a view of a dumpster and the highway. My father, Otis, sat on the edge of the bed staring at the brown carpet. He had not taken off his coat. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out. Beside him, Jasmine was trying to change Leo's diaper on the bedspread, but the baby was screaming. The noise bounced off the thin, peeling walls, creating an echo chamber of misery. The luxury nursery she had envisioned was gone, replaced by a vending machine down the hall and a bathroom with a dripping faucet. My mother, Joyce, was not helping. She was pacing the narrow strip of floor between the beds and the dresser, her heels clicking aggressively on the linoleum. She needed a villain, and since I was out of reach, she turned her sights on the absent martyr. "I cannot believe we listened to him," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. Kyle said he had handled the legalities. He said he had a verbal contract. What kind of real estate agent does not know that a text message is not a lease? He is incompetent. He humiliated us, Otis. Did you see the way that security guard looked at me? Like I was trash. Jasmine looked up from the baby, her eyes swollen and red. "Stop it, Mom. He is in jail right now. He was trying to get us a home. You were the one who told him to be aggressive. You told him to take charge." Joyce spun around, her face contorted in anger. "I told him to be a man, not a fool. He marched us in there with a U-Haul truck like we were squatters. He got himself arrested and left us here in this dump with nothing. We gave up your apartment, Jasmine. We threw away perfectly good furniture because he promised us a mansion. He is a dreamer with no brain, and he has dragged us all down with him." Otis finally spoke, his voice low and defeated. "It is not just Kyle, Joyce. We all signed off on this. We got greedy. We thought we could bully Nia and take what was hers. Now she is gone and we are paying the price." Joyce scoffed, crossing her arms. "Don't you defend her. She set a trap." But Kyle walked right into it with his eyes closed. "Now we are stuck in a motel with a crying baby, and your son-in-law is sitting in a holding cell, probably crying for a lawyer we cannot afford." The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the baby's whimpers and the relentless buzz of the neon sign outside. The air conditioner rattled, kicking on, with a noise that sounded like a dying engine. They were trapped in a box of their own making. The heating unit blew dust into the air, and for the first time, they realized that the warmth of the family they claimed to value was actually just the heat of friction from blaming one another. The long night had just begun. The silence in the motel room was thick enough to choke on, broken only by the hum of the vending machine down the hall. Then suddenly, a synchronized chime cut through the air. It was a notification sound that echoed from my father's pocket, from my mother's purse, and from the phone Jasmine was clutching like a lifeline. 3 screens lit up simultaneously, casting a ghostly blue glow on their exhausted faces. It was an email. The sender was Nia Williams. The subject line was simply "Closure." My mother, Joyce, was the first to unlock her phone. Her fingers trembled as she tapped the icon, hoping for an apology or perhaps a notification that I had bailed Kyle out. Instead, she began to read aloud, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "Dear family, you spent the last week telling me that I was selfish. You told me that I did not need 5,000 square feet of space just for myself. You told me that family makes sacrifices for one another. I want you to know that I listened. I took your advice to heart. I decided to downsize immediately, just as you requested. Joyce paused, her eyes widening as she scanned the next paragraph. I sat back in my first-class seat watching the flight map update as I imagined them reading the next part. Since I no longer needed the apartment, I sold it. The proceeds of $12 million have been successfully transferred into an irrevocable trust in a jurisdiction that does not recognize U.S. civil judgments. That money is for my future. It is not for bail. It is not for rent. And it is certainly not for renovation projects. I am using it to invest in the one thing I have neglected for too long: my own peace of mind. Jasmine let out a whimper, reading over my mother's shoulder. She says she is gone, Mom. She says she is not coming back. Joyce continued reading, her voice rising to a screech. Regarding Kyle, he seemed very passionate about the concept of squatter rights and taking over space that does not belong to him. I understand he is currently a guest of the state at the county jail. I am sure with his expertise in property law, he will be able to negotiate a very comfortable bunk. Perhaps he can claim adverse possession of his cell if he stays there long enough. My father, Otis, stared at his own screen, his jaw slack. He looked at the final lines of the email, which were perhaps the coldest of all. Do not try to contact me. My numbers are changed. My social media is deactivated. You wanted the keys to my life. Well, I changed the locks. You are on your own. Goodbye. The phone slipped from my mother's hand and landed on the dirty carpet. There was no screaming this time. There was no explosion of anger. There was only the crushing weight of absolute defeat. They had played a game of power and manipulation against a woman who traded risk for a living. They thought they were the sharks, but they had just realized they were merely chum in the water. The screen went dark, leaving them in the dim yellow light of the motel room with nothing but their debt, their ego, and the echo of my final goodbye. The checkmate was complete. The fluorescent lights of the bank branch hummed with a headache-inducing frequency that seemed to drill directly into my father's skull. Otis stood at the teller window, his hands trembling slightly as he slid the withdrawal slip across the marble counter. It was not a small sum. It was a significant, jagged chunk of the emergency fund he had spent 40 years of hard labor building. He was not withdrawing money for a vacation or a new car. He was withdrawing his own security to buy freedom for a man who had just destroyed their lives. The teller, a young woman who looked bored, tapped her keyboard with agonizing slowness. "Sir," she said, popping her gum, "I have to inform you that this withdrawal dips into the principal of your retirement tier. There is a substantial penalty fee for early liquidation. Are you sure you want to proceed?" Otis closed his eyes. He felt the physical pain of the penalty. It was not just a bank fee. It was the tax on his own failure as a father. He had raised a daughter who became a millionaire and pushed her away, and now he was bankrupting himself for the son-in-law who had humiliated him. "Yes," he whispered, his voice sounding like dry leaves. "Just do it." He took the cashier's check. It felt heavy in his pocket, like a stone that was going to drag him to the bottom of the lake. 3 hours later, the heavy steel door of the Cook County Jail buzzed and swung open. Kyle stepped out into the gray winter light. He did not look like the real estate tycoon he pretended to be yesterday. The transformation was pathetic. His expensive blue suit was wrinkled, stained with sweat, and smelled of institutional disinfectant. His tie was missing, confiscated as a suicide risk, and his shoelaces were gone, leaving his designer loafers flopping uselessly on his feet. He looked small, pale, and utterly defeated. He walked toward the idling sedan, his head down, avoiding eye contact with the father-in-law, whose retirement he had just incinerated. He slid into the back seat next to a silent, weeping Jasmine. The car smelled of stale fast food and despair. Kyle tried to clear his throat to muster some shred of his old bravado. "Look, Otis, I can fix this," he croaked, his voice raspy from dehydration. "It is a misunderstanding. Once I get my lawyer on the phone, we will sue the department for excessive force. I will get my license back, and we will sue Nia, too." Otis gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He did not turn around. He simply looked at Kyle's reflection in the rearview mirror with eyes that were dead and cold. There is nothing to fix, Kyle. The lawyer called me while we were waiting. You assaulted a police officer on camera. You have been charged with a felony. Kyle opened his mouth to argue, but Otis cut him off. The State Real Estate Licensing Board has an automatic suspension policy for violent crimes. They were notified the moment your fingerprints hit the system. Your license is gone. You are not a broker anymore. You are an unemployed criminal with a permanent record. You cannot even legally show a house, let alone sell one. Kyle slumped against the cold window glass, watching the city roll by. The skyline he used to claim he owned now looked like prison bars. The empire he built in his head had not just collapsed, it had been condemned, and he was trapped in the rubble. The irony was suffocating. We were standing in the exact room my parents had prepared for Nia. They had cleared out a corner of the unfinished basement and painted the concrete floor a depressing shade of gray, expecting her to be grateful for the scraps. Now, the five of us were crammed into this damp subterranean dungeon like rats in a cage. The air was heavy with the smell of mildew and unwashed laundry, a stark contrast to the filtered climate-controlled oxygen of the penthouse we had almost touched. There were no windows down here, just a single naked bulb hanging from a rafter casting harsh shadows on our misery. The space was chaos. Since we had thrown away Jasmine's furniture in a fit of arrogance, we were sleeping on air mattresses that my father had frantically purchased from a 24-hour superstore. The floor was littered with black garbage bags containing the few clothes we had left. It looked less like a living situation and more like the aftermath of a natural disaster. In the corner, Leo was screaming in his portable crib, his face red with exhaustion. The sound bounced off the concrete walls, amplifying the tension until it felt physical. Jasmine sat cross-legged on a deflating mattress, trying to mix baby formula with bottled water. She looked up at Kyle, who was pacing the small strip of floor between the furnace and the water heater. He was still wearing the same suit pants from the arrest, but they were wrinkled and covered in dust. "We have $12, Kyle Jasmine screamed, throwing the empty formula canister at his feet. The plastic clattered loudly on the cement. $12. That is it. That is all we have in the joint account. How are we supposed to buy diapers? How are we supposed to eat? You said you had savings. You said you had a rainy day fund." Kyle kicked the canister away, his face twisting into a snarl. "I spent it on the retainer for the lawyer, Jasmine. Do you want me to go to prison? Is that what you want? I am facing a felony charge because I tried to get a house for you. I risked everything for this family, and now you are nagging me about money. Don't you dare put this on me." Jasmine shot back, standing up and getting in his face. "You told me it was a done deal. You told me to break the lease. You told me to throw away the sofa. You walked around like you owned the city, but you were just an unemployed loser with a fake Rolex. You ruined us." My mother Joyce sat on a folding chair in the corner, her head in her hands. She tried to intervene, her voice shrill and desperate. "Stop it, both of you. Fighting is not going to help. We just need to figure out a plan. Kyle, surely you can call one of your developer friends. Maybe they have a rental property we can use for a few months until this blows over." Kyle let out a bitter laugh that sounded more like a bark. "Friends? Mom, look around you. I do not have friends. I had contacts. I had people who used me to make money. The second my mugshot hit the internet yesterday, my phone stopped ringing. I am radioactive. No one is going to rent to us. No one is going to hire me. We are stuck here." The baby's wails intensified, piercing through the argument. The furnace kicked on with a loud shudder, blowing dust and cold air into the room. This was the reality they had designed for me. A cold, dark hole where dreams go to die. The only difference was that I had the resources to escape it. They did not. They were trapped in the basement of their own making, tearing each other apart over $12 and a can of formula, while the ghost of the life they felt entitled to laughed from 5,000 miles away. The fallout from the lobby incident was swift and digital. Kyle sat on the edge of the air mattress in the basement, clutching his phone as if it were a grenade that had already had the pin pulled. He was on the phone with Gary, the owner of the boutique brokerage firm where he had worked for 5 years. Kyle was using his best persuasive voice, the one he used to close deals, but Gary was not buying it. "Gary, listen to me," Kyle pleaded, wiping sweat from his forehead. "The video is taken out of context. She provoked me. I was defending my family's property rights. I can issue a public apology. We can spin this." There was a pause on the other end, cold enough to freeze the basement pipes. "Kyle, there is no spinning this," Gary said, his voice flat. "The video has 2 million views on TikTok. The comments are calling you the penthouse pincher. My inbox is flooded with clients threatening to pull their listings if I keep you on the roster. You are toxic, Kyle. You are fired effective immediately. Do not come to the office to clean out your desk. I will have security box up your things and leave them at the curb." The line went dead. Kyle stared at the screen. Before he could even process the fact that his career was over, the phone rang again. He answered it instinctively, hoping Gary had changed his mind. "Mr. Sterling, this is the fraud department at American Express. We are calling regarding the $40,000 balance on your Platinum card. We noticed a missed payment, and given the recent changes in your employment status flagged in our system, we are freezing your credit line immediately. We need to discuss a repayment schedule for the full balance." Kyle dropped the phone on the concrete floor. The house of cards he had built on leverage and lies had collapsed. He had been financing his flash lifestyle on high-interest credit, assuming the commission from the penthouse sale would cover it all. Now the commission was gone, the job was gone, and the debt collectors were circling like sharks, sensing blood in the water. Across town, the humiliation was taking a different form. Jasmine stood under the harsh fluorescent lights of the budget grocery store 3 blocks from our parents' house. She was not wearing her white fur coat or the designer heels she had strutted around in just 2 days ago. She was wearing a red polyester vest that was 2 sizes too big and smelled of stale onions. A plastic name tag that read trainee was pinned crookedly to her chest. She stood at register 4, scanning cans of beans and frozen pizzas for a line of impatient customers. Her hands, which had been manicured for a life of leisure, were now dry and shaking as she fumbled with the produce codes. Beep, beep, beep. The sound was a rhythmic torture. "Excuse me, lady, are you going to bag those or just stare at them?" A woman in sweatpants snapped, tapping her debit card on the counter. "I am sorry," Jasmine whispered, keeping her head down, terrified that someone from her old yoga class or high school might recognize her. She hurriedly shoved the items into plastic bags, her face burning with shame. Just 48 hours ago, she was planning to hire a nanny and host galas in a $10 million home. Now she was asking strangers if they had coupons and praying her shift would end before she completely fell apart. She had looked down on people with jobs like this her entire life, treating them as invisible. Now she was the invisible one, trapped in a polyester purgatory of her own making, working for minimum wage to buy diapers for the baby she used to use as a prop. The fall from the top had not killed her, but the landing was breaking every bone in her ego. The winter sun over the Seine was a soft golden haze that felt a world away from the biting gray frost of Chicago. I walked along the cobblestone banks of the Ile Saint-Louis, breathing an air that smelled of roasted chestnuts and damp stone. There was no buzzing of phones here, no screaming arguments, and no desperate grasping for status. There was only the rhythmic lapping of the water against the quay and the distant sound of an accordion playing a waltz. I felt lighter, as if gravity had released its hold on me the moment the plane touched down at Charles de Gaulle. I turned the corner and met Monsieur Dubois, a short, elderly man with a kind face and a wool scarf wrapped 3 times around his neck. He was holding a heavy iron key, not a biometric scanner. We walked up the winding wooden staircase of a building that had stood since the 19th century. There was no concierge judging my outfit, and no security cameras tracking my eye movement. We stopped on the 3rd floor, and he unlocked the double doors. The apartment was nothing like the sterile glass box I had left behind. It was smaller intimately so, but every inch of it had a soul. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling French windows, illuminating the honey-colored herringbone parquet floors. There was an intricate marble fireplace and crown molding that looked like wedding cake frosting. It was imperfect. The floorboards creaked slightly, and the radiator hissed a welcoming song. It was not a trophy to show off to envious friends. It was a sanctuary. I walked to the balcony and looked out. I could see the flying buttresses of Notre Dame, recovering and rising again just like me. Monsieur Dubois watched me carefully. It is not as modern as the American style, he said apologetically. There is no smart home system. I smiled, touching the cold iron railing. That is exactly why I want it. I will take it. No mortgage, no banks, a direct wire transfer. An hour later, I sat at a small round table at a corner brasserie with a glass of Bordeaux and a signed deed in my purse. I pulled my phone out of my coat pocket. It was a burner phone I had bought at the airport, but I had briefly turned on my old SIM card just to ensure the transfer of my digital life was complete. The notifications flooded in like a tidal wave of toxic sludge. Missed calls from jail, hysterical voicemails from my mother, text messages from Jasmine oscillating between begging for money and cursing my existence. They were still trapped in the cycle of chaos I had escaped. They were fighting over scraps in a basement while I was watching the sunset over the Seine. I did not feel anger anymore. I did not even feel pity. I felt indifferent. I went into the settings menu and selected the contacts for Mom, Dad, Jasmine, and Kyle. I did not just delete them. I added them to a permanent carrier sideblock list. I watched their names disappear from my screen one by one. With each tap, a tether snapped. When the screen was finally empty, I popped the SIM card out of the phone and dropped it into my empty wine glass. The red liquid swallowed the chip, drowning their voices forever. I signaled the waiter for the check. My new life had officially begun, and for the first time in 32 years, it belonged entirely to me. 3 weeks into my new life in Paris, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived at the forwarding service I had set up for tax documents. It was buried between a bank statement and a magazine subscription. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. It was the looped performative cursive of my mother Joyce. She had sent it to my old executive assistant at the trading firm, marked urgent and personal, hoping someone would take pity and forward it. They had. I sat in my velvet armchair by the marble fireplace, listening to the rain tap against the French windows. I held the envelope for a long time. It felt heavy, not with paper weight, but with the density of the emotional manipulation packed inside. I considered throwing it directly into the fire unopened, but curiosity is a dangerous thing. I wanted to see if they had learned anything. I sliced the envelope open with a silver letter opener and unfolded the stationery. Dearest Nia, the letter began. We hope this finds you well. We have been so worried about you leaving without saying a proper goodbye. It hurts us to think you are out there all alone. We want you to know that we forgive you for the confusion regarding the apartment. We know you did not mean to put us in this position, and we know you were just stressed. We are a family, and families forgive each other. I let out a dry, hollow laugh that echoed in the high ceilings of the room. They forgave me. After trying to steal my home and erasing my existence, they were offering me forgiveness. I read on. Things are very hard here, Nia. The basement is damp and your father has developed a terrible cough. The doctor says it is the mold. Little Leo cries all night because it is so cold. Kyle is trying his best, but the system is rigged against him. He cannot get work and we are running out of food. We are not asking for a handout, just a loan. If you could wire $50,000 just to help us get a security deposit on a clean apartment, we would pay you back as soon as Kyle gets back on his feet. Please, Nia. Do it for your father. Do it for the baby. We love you. Mom. I lowered the paper. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. There was no apology. There was no acknowledgement of their greed. There was only a distorted retelling of history where they were the innocent victims and I was the confused daughter who needed to make amends with her checkbook. They did not miss me. They missed my liquidity. They missed the ATM machine that walked and talked and looked like their daughter. They were using my father's health and my nephew's comfort as bargaining chips one last time. I stood up and walked to the fireplace where the logs were crackling warmly. I did not feel a pang of guilt. I felt the cold, absolute clarity of a surgeon cutting out a necrotic tumor. I held the letter by the corner and lowered it toward the flames. The fire caught the edge of the expensive paper instantly. I watched the words, "Dearest Nia," curl and blacken. I watched the request for $50,000 turn into gray ash. I dropped the burning page onto the logs and watched it disappear completely. There would be no reply. There would be no wire transfer. The bridge was not just burned, it was incinerated. The suffocating atmosphere of the basement finally reached its flashpoint on a Tuesday evening. The tension had been building for weeks, a silent gas leak waiting for a spark. That spark came when my father Otis collapsed on the concrete floor, clutching his chest, gasping for breath in the damp air. My mother screamed for his nitroglycerin pills, the emergency medication they kept in a lockbox with their last dwindling reserve of cash. Jasmine scrambled to the rusted metal cabinet, her hands shaking as she keyed in the combination. She threw the lid open, expecting to find the pills and the $2,000 they had saved from selling her engagement ring. The box was empty. There were no pills, there was no cash, there was only a pawnshop receipt crumpled in the corner. Jasmine stared at the paper, her brain struggling to process the betrayal. The date on the receipt was from that morning. The item listed was Diamond Solitaire Ring, Platinum Band. But the cash was gone. She turned slowly to look at Kyle, who was sitting on his air mattress, frantically thumbing through his phone, ignoring the chaos of his father-in-law gasping on the floor. "Where is it?" Jasmine's voice was a low, guttural growl that didn't sound like her. "Where is the money?" Kyle, "Dad can't breathe." Kyle didn't look up. He kept tapping at his screen, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple. "I invested it, Jazz. I got a tip on a crypto coin. It's going to moon. We're going to double it by tomorrow. I just needed some capital to get back in the game." The room went silent save for Otis's wheezing. Jasmine walked over to him, snatched the phone from his hands and looked at the screen. He wasn't on a trading app, he was on a sports betting site and the balance read 0. He had bet their survival money, her father's life-saving medication money, on a basketball game. And he had lost. Something inside Jasmine broke. The facade of the golden couple's eyes. The high school sweethearts who were destined for greatness, shattered into a million jagged pieces. She saw him clearly for the first time, not as a visionary entrepreneur, but as a leech who had drained her family dry. She lunged at him, her fingernails clawing at his face. "You thief! You killed us!" she screamed, slapping him with a violence born of pure desperation. "My dad is dying and you gambled it away!" Kyle shoved her back hard, sending her crashing into a stack of cardboard boxes. "Get off me, it's not my fault. If your bitch of a sister hadn't ruined me, I wouldn't have to resort to this. I'm trying to save this family." "Save us!" Jasmine laughed, a hysterical, broken sound. "You're a parasite, Kyle. You're done. Get out." "Excuse me," Kyle sneered, wiping blood from his cheek. "I said get out," Jasmine roared, grabbing his suitcase and hurling it toward the stairs. "We are over. I am filing for divorce tomorrow. I don't care if I have to beg a lawyer to take the case pro bono. I want you gone." Kyle looked at her, then at Otis struggling on the floor, and finally at my mother who was looking at him with pure hatred. He didn't apologize. He didn't check on his father-in-law. He simply grabbed his coat. "Fine. Good luck surviving without me. You're nothing without a man to take care of you, Jasmine. You're just a spoiled brat with a crying baby." He stormed up the wooden stairs and slammed the door, leaving them in the silence of the basement. Jasmine sank to the floor, pulling her crying son into her lap. The golden child was dead. The princess of the family was gone. In her place sat a single mother with no money, a sick father, and a bleak future stretching out before her. She had spent her life looking down on single mothers as tragic figures. Now, she was one. And as she rocked Leo back and forth in the cold, damp dark, she realized that the hardest part wasn't the poverty. It was knowing that she had chosen this path step by arrogant step. The ambulance ride was a blur of potholed streets and harsh sirens that seemed to mock the urgency of my father's condition. When they finally wheeled Otis into the intake area of the County General Hospital, it was a far cry from the hushed, carpeted corridors of the private medical center he was used to. There was no concierge desk. There was no soft jazz playing. There was only the chaos of a Friday night in an underfunded public facility. The air smelled of rubbing alcohol, stale sweat, and desperation. My mother Joyce marched up to the intake window, still clutching her purse like a shield. She tried to summon her usual air of authority. "My husband is experiencing a cardiac event," she announced loudly. "We require a private room immediately, preferably one with a view, as he needs a calm environment for recovery. And please tell Dr. Henderson that Otis Williams is here. He has treated him before." The triage nurse behind the plexiglass did not even look up from her typing. "Dr. Henderson practices at Northwestern Memorial, ma'am. This is county. And looking at your insurance file here, you are on the state-subsidized catastrophic plan. That does not cover private rooms. It barely covers the bed he is currently lying on in the hallway." Joyce gasped, affronted. "That is ridiculous. We have coverage. My daughter is a wealthy trader. She always handles the upgrades. Just put it on her tab." The nurse finally looked up, her expression tired and unamused. "The file says the primary policyholder is Otis Williams. There is no other guarantor listed. Unless you want to provide a credit card for a $5,000 deposit right now, he stays in the general ward. Next, please." They wheeled Otis past the overflowing rooms and parked his gurney in a crowded corridor next to a man who was coughing violently. When Otis finally fluttered his eyes open, he did not see a bouquet of lilies or a smiling specialist. He saw a flickering fluorescent light buzzing above his head and a water stain on the ceiling shaped like a grimace. His chest felt heavy, like an elephant was sitting on his rib cage, but the pain in his heart was sharper. He looked around, expecting to see me. 2 years ago, when he had a minor palpitation scare, I had him in a VIP suite within an hour. I had hired private nurses. I had brought him his favorite soup. I had sat by his bedside holding his hand while he complained about the thread count of the sheets. Now he looked to his left and saw Joyce arguing with a janitor about the floor being sticky. He looked to his right and saw Jasmine scrolling through her phone, her face illuminated by the blue light, looking bored and annoyed that her evening had been interrupted. "Nia," Otis whispered, his voice a dry rasp. Joyce stopped arguing and looked down at him. "She is not coming, Otis. Stop asking for her. She abandoned us, remember? You are stuck here because of her selfishness." Otis closed his eyes as a tear leaked out and rolled into his ear. The realization hit him harder than the heart attack. It wasn't selfishness, it was survival. I hadn't abandoned him. I had simply stopped paying for the privilege of being abused. He remembered how he had called me cold, how he had called me ungrateful. Now, lying on a thin stretcher in a drafty hallway covered by a scratchy blanket, he finally understood the value of the daughter he had thrown away. He was not a patriarch anymore. He was just an old man with bad credit dying in a hallway surrounded by the family he chose, and for the first time in his life, he realized he had chosen wrong. The monitor beeping steadily beside him was the only thing in the room that seemed to care if he lived or died. Autumn in Paris was a symphony of burnt orange leaves and crisp air that smelled of rain and roasted coffee. I was sitting at a corner table at Café de Flore, enjoying a quiet afternoon with a book and a pot of Earl Grey tea. It had been exactly 1 year since I boarded that plane at O'Hare. 1 year of silence. 1 year of healing. My skin was clearer, and the chronic tension headaches that used to plague me had vanished completely. I was no longer the bank. I was just Nia. The peace was interrupted by a familiar voice calling my name. I looked up to see Elena, a former colleague from the trading floor in Chicago. She was in Paris for Fashion Week and looked like a fish out of water in her frantic energy. I invited her to sit more out of politeness than desire. After the initial pleasantries about the weather and my new haircut, Elena leaned in. Her voice dropped to that conspiratorial whisper that used to dominate the office break room. I actually saw your mother a few weeks ago, Nia. I was shopping at that discount outlet mall in the suburbs, the one near the airport. She was working the register at the housewares store. I took a slow sip of tea. The liquid was warm and grounding. Is that so? I asked, my tone flat. Elena nodded, eager to spill the tea. She looked terrible, Nia. She has aged 10 years. She was arguing with a manager about her break schedule. And I heard about your father. My cousin works at the rehabilitation center where he is staying. It is a state-funded facility. She said he had a stroke after his heart attack. He is in a wheelchair now. I set my cup down on the saucer with a gentle clink. I waited for the pang of guilt to hit me. I waited for the urge to pull out my checkbook and rush to save them. But it never came. Instead, I felt a detached sense of pity, like reading about a stranger's misfortune in a newspaper. And Jasmine Elena continued, assuming my silence was shock. She is living in a one-bedroom apartment in Cicero. I heard she is waiting tables at a diner during the day and cleaning offices at night. Kyle disappeared to Florida to avoid his gambling debts. It is a total disaster, Nia. Everyone is asking how you could let this happen. How you could just leave them like that. I looked Elena in the eye. The old Nia would have defended herself. The old Nia would have explained the abuse, the theft, and the betrayal. But the new Nia did not owe anyone an explanation. I did not let anything happen, Elena. I simply removed myself from the equation. They are adults who made a series of calculated decisions. They gambled their security on the assumption that I would always be their safety net. When they tried to steal my home, they cut that net themselves. But surely you can help them now, Elena pressed. Just a little. Your father is sick. I signaled the waiter for the check. My father had 40 years to prepare for his old age. My mother had a lifetime to treat her daughter with respect instead of viewing me as a resource. They chose greed over family. Now they are living in the reality they created. I placed a crisp €50 note on the table. I hope you enjoy the rest of your trip, Elena. Please do not tell them you saw me. I stood up and gathered my coat. Elena sat there, mouth slightly open, confused by my coldness. She did not understand. She saw a tragedy. I saw justice. I walked out of the cafe and turned onto Boulevard Saint-Germain. The wind was cool against my face. I did not look back. I had a dinner reservation at 8, and I did not want to be late. The past was dead, and I had never felt more alive. The dining room table in my apartment on the Ile Saint-Louis was set for 8. For the first time in my life, the preparation for a dinner party did not involve a Xanax prescription or a preemptive call to a therapist. There was no anxiety tightening my chest, no rehearsing defensive lines for passive-aggressive insults, and no hiding my wallet. The air smelled of rosemary, roasted garlic, and the rich, earthy scent of a good Pinot Noir. It was Thanksgiving, a holiday I used to dread more than a root canal, but tonight it felt like a celebration of liberation. I looked around the room at the people filling the chairs. There was Luca, a struggling architect, who insisted on bringing the wine even though he could barely afford his rent. There was Isabel, a 70-year-old retired literature professor who lived downstairs and always told me the truth, even when it was sharp. There was Kemi, a fellow expat and artist who had held my hand when I cried over a broken mug last month. This was my chosen family. They did not share my DNA. They did not know about the penthouse or the $12 million trust. They knew me as Nia, the woman who made terrible puns and excellent risky trading moves. For 30 years, I had believed the lie that family was a biological mandate, an unbreakable contract that required me to bankrupt my soul to keep the peace. I thought my worth was calculated by how much I could provide, how much I could fix, and how much abuse I could absorb without complaining. I spent decades trying to buy the love of people who viewed me as an asset class rather than a human being. I was an investment to my parents, a safety net to my sister, and a rival to my brother-in-law. But as I watched Luca laugh at Isabel's story, pouring more wine into her glass without being asked, I realized the fundamental truth that had escaped me for so long. Love is not a transaction. It is not a debt you pay. It is a gift you give freely. These people at my table did not want my money. They wanted my company. They did not drain me. They replenished me. Isabel tapped her glass with a fork, drawing the room's attention. She raised a toast, looking directly at me with eyes that crinkled at the corners. To Nia, she said warmly, for bringing us together, and for having the courage to rewrite her own story. I felt a lump in my throat, but it wasn't fear. It was gratitude. I raised my glass. I didn't think about the cold basement in Chicago. I didn't think about my father in the state hospital or my sister scanning groceries. Those were the characters in a book I had finished reading. I had closed the cover and put it back on the shelf. To the family we choose, I said, my voice steady and clear. We clinked glasses, the crystals singing a clear, pure note that resonated through the warm apartment. I took a sip of the wine. It tasted complex, full-bodied, and sweet. It tasted like freedom. I was finally home, not in a place, but in a feeling. And for the first time in my life, I was exactly enough, just as I was. The laughter from my dinner party still lingered in the warm air of the apartment as I stood by the window looking out at the darkened streets of Paris. The reflection in the glass was mine, but for a split second the image shifted. I was no longer looking at the confident woman in a silk blouse. I was looking back at a ghost. My mind drifted back to the catalyst. It was Christmas Eve 2 years ago. The memory was sharp and cold like a shard of ice. I was standing in my parents' living room in Chicago. I had spent 6 months planning the ultimate gift for them. I had worked 80-hour weeks and sacrificed my own vacation to make it happen. I handed my father a thick red envelope. My hands were shaking with anticipation, waiting for the tears of joy, waiting for the hug that would finally tell me I was good enough. Otis opened the envelope. Inside was the deed to their house, stamped paid in full. I had secretly paid off the remaining $200,000 of their mortgage. I watched his face. He did not smile. He did not cry. He looked at the paper and then looked over at Kyle, who was sitting on the sofa drinking my expensive scotch. Well, that is good. Otis grunted, tossing the deed onto the coffee table like it was a junk mail flyer. This frees up the equity. I blinked, confused. Dad, I paid it off so you can retire. So you do not have to worry about payments. My mother Joyce chimed in from the kitchen, cutting a slice of pie. Don't be naive, Nia. Since the house is clear, we can take out a home equity line of credit. Kyle has a fantastic investment opportunity in commercial real estate. We were maxed out before, but now the bank will loan to us against the house. This is perfect timing. My stomach dropped. I had just spent a fortune to secure their future, and they were already planning to leverage it to fund another one of Kyle's gambling addictions. I looked at Kyle. He raised his glass to me with a smirk. Thanks for the seed money, Nia. You finally made yourself useful. Jasmine looked up from her phone. Wait, so Mom and Dad get a paid-off house and Kyle gets a loan. What do I get? I specifically asked for the Celine bag in beige, not black. You never listened to me, Nia. You are so thoughtless. I stood there in the center of the room, surrounded by torn wrapping paper, and realized I was completely invisible. I was not a daughter or a sister. I was a resource. I was an ATM machine with a heartbeat. If I died tomorrow, they would not mourn me. They would mourn the loss of my income. I excused myself and walked to the guest bathroom. I locked the door and turned on the faucet to mask the sound of my breathing. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were red, but I did not cry. That was the moment the sadness died and the resolve was born. I washed my face with cold water and made a silent vow to the woman in the glass. I promised her that I would never buy their love again. I promised her that I would save myself. Back in Paris, I touched the cold window pane, bringing myself back to the present. The ghost in the reflection faded, leaving only me. I smiled. That Christmas broke my heart, but it also set me free. It was the night I stopped being their victim and started writing the ending to their story. I turned away from the window and the ghost of my past walking back toward the center of the room where the candlelight flickered against the crystal glasses. The laughter of my friends. My real family drifted in from the balcony, a melody of genuine joy that I had never heard in the penthouse on the 51st floor. I paused, feeling the weight of the silence in the room, and for the first time, I looked directly into the camera lens. I looked past the fourth wall, staring straight into the eyes of anyone watching who felt the heavy, suffocating chain of obligation around their neck. "I know what you are thinking," I said, my voice calm and intimate, stripped of all pretense. "You think I was ruthless. You think that leaving them in that basement, stripping them of their status, and watching them fall was an act of vengeance. But you are wrong. It was not vengeance. It was a rescue mission. The only person I could save was myself." I walked slowly toward the lens, the background blurring into soft bokeh. We are taught from birth that blood is a binding contract. We are told that family is a sanctuary even when it feels like a prison. We are conditioned to believe that setting boundaries is an act of war and that saying no is an act of betrayal. I spent 30 years apologizing for my own success. I spent a lifetime trying to fill a bucket that had a hole in the bottom, pouring my energy, my money, and my love into people who only saw me as a utility. They weaponized my empathy. They used my desire for approval as a leash to choke me with. I stopped my expression hardening just a fraction. But here is the secret they do not want you to know. The guilt they use to control you is not real. It is a phantom. It is a mechanism designed to keep you in your place serving their needs while your own dreams starve in the corner. There is a difference between being a daughter and being a hostage. A family that demands you set yourself on fire to keep them warm is not a family. It is a cult of personality, and you are the sacrifice. They will call you selfish when you stop letting them use you. They will call you cold when you stop burning for them. Let them. Their anger is just the sound of a parasite losing its host. I reached for my coat, a simple trench that cost more than my brother-in-law's car, but I wore it not for the label, but for the warmth. Do not wait for them to change. Do not wait for an apology that will never come. Do not mortgage your soul to buy a place at a table where you are served last. You owe them nothing, not your time, not your money, and certainly not your sanity. I opened the door to the hallway, the sounds of Paris nightlife beckoning me. I looked back one last time, a small, knowing smile playing on my lips. It was the smile of someone who had walked through fire and came out not as ash but as gold. Here's the truth that took me $12 million to learn. Never let the title of family turn you into a hostage. If they want to rob your house, do not just lock the door. Sell it. Sell it all, walk away from the rubble, and use the cash to buy the whole damn world for yourself. I stepped out into the night and closed the door. The screen went black. That decision wasn't just about real estate, it was about reclaiming my soul. For decades, I allowed shared DNA to act as a binding contract, obligating me to accept disrespect, manipulation, and theft. I thought that being the bigger person meant absorbing the blows and smoothing over the cracks. I was wrong. Being the bigger person simply made me a bigger target. When they came for my home, they weren't just trying to take 4 walls and a roof, they were trying to strip away my security, my independence, and my hard-won stability. They thought I would fold because I always had. They thought the fear of being an outcast would force me to hand over the keys. But they forgot that an outcast is just someone who has been freed from the rules of a rigged game. Selling that property was the most liberating check I ever cashed. I took that money and invested it in myself, in my business, and in a future where their voices are nothing but distant static. I built a life so loud with joy and success that it drowned out their criticism. And the irony is delicious. By trying to leave me with nothing, they pushed me to acquire everything. I stopped looking for a seat at their table and built my own banquet hall. Now I am surrounded by a chosen family, people who celebrate my wins without jealousy and support me through losses without judgment. These are bonds forged in respect, not obligation. That is what real family looks like. So to anyone watching this, who feels trapped by the weight of expectation, who feels like they are drowning in guilt trips and gaslighting, listen to me. Your mental health is more valuable than their comfort. Your boundaries are not an act of war. They are an act of self-preservation. You do not owe anyone your happiness, your assets, or your peace of mind simply because you share a last name. Walk away. Let them call you selfish. Let them call you cold. Let them paint you as the villain in a story they are writing to hide their own shame. You will be too busy enjoying your freedom to care. Cut the cord, cash the check, and go live a life so beautiful it makes them weep. You deserve the world, so go out there and buy it. The most profound lesson from this journey is that shared DNA is not a lifetime pass for disrespect or exploitation. We often cling to toxic family dynamics out of a misplaced sense of obligation, fearing the guilt of walking away more than the pain of staying. But true freedom begins the moment you realize that boundaries are not acts of war. They are acts of self-preservation. You do not owe anyone your peace, your assets, or your future. Sometimes burning a bridge is the only way to light your path forward. Choose yourself unapologetically. If you've ever had to choose your peace over family expectations, hit that subscribe button and share your story in the comments. Let's build a community that values respect over blood.